Hello everybody, this is Mark with Pelican Wooden Things. Last week I showed how to make this blank where you get the resin in every little nook and cranny. Let's see how it came out. Been drilling a couple holes in there so I can center it on my chuck. So I'm beginning by making a flat face on the front to attach a tenon. You can see this is fairly off balance. The lathe is bouncing a bit. Turned out that this was not as off balance as you can see visually. It's running fairly true, but the lathe is bouncing anyway. Turns out that resin and wood have different mass, so there's a lot of disbalance throughout this whole project because basically a good portion of it is resin and on the other side a good portion of it is wood. But we deal with it the best we can. So here I created a tenon so I can flip this thing around, and I'm going to make a lidded vessel, so I'm going to make tenons on both ends. Attach it to my chuck there, much more secure holding. And basically repeat the same process on this end. Again, you can see visually it is running quite true. However, the lathe is still bouncing. I thought by trying to round it out more thoroughly I could get it to balance better. Unfortunately, that did not work, but that's okay. We got it done in the end. So like I did on the other side, I'm going to flatten out this end and create a tenon. Throw in a little real-time effort in there once in a while so you can see how long these cuts actually take. Resin everywhere. Looks like it's coming out fairly nice. Like how the wood and the resin contrast with each other. Here I am creating the tenon, squaring it up, so I will have one on each end, and I can grab both ends of this blank in my chuck. For one side to create the bowl bottom and the other side to create the lid. Maybe get a little aggressive here and cut off a bunch of this waste material. I'm going to try to get a nice shape in there, round on the bottom, and flare it out a little bit at the top. I have an idea for the lid that it flares out this time. And that's how I want to create, so let's go for it. See, the shape is starting to come together. Turning me into the resin monster. Kind of interesting making these cuts. Half is wood, half is resin, and so the texture changes very rapidly as the lathe turns and you're cutting across it. You have to try to not let your tool freak out when the texture changes so much. On the plus side, the resin trails that you see are much shorter. They don't wrap around so readily around the lathe and the headstock there. And of course, there's always sanding. Add a little abrasive paste as a final sanding step. Looking pretty good. I like the swirls and the resin and how it moves in and out with the wood. Very nice. And all those little dark spots, that's where resin was pulled into the little nooks and crannies, wormholes, and etc. I think my method has worked quite well. If you want to see how I did it, check out last week's video. I'm going to cut the top off now so I can create the lid to this vessel. On the top part of the lid, I cut a notch in, maybe a 1/4 inch from the edge of the bowl. Maybe a little bit more. I know when I put them back together, there'll be some fine tuning I'll have to do to make sure that the top and the bottom meet in a smooth surface. So I want to make sure I leave extra room for that. Like when the top lid slides over the bottom bowl, I think it looks better that way. Now do a little hollowing out on the inside of the lid. I'm going to leave it fairly thick because I have an idea I want to try out for later on. I think I'll save it for a surprise. We'll see how it works out. Making a little chatter and leaving little divots in the resin, so I'm going to have to smooth this out, cut back a little bit more than I had intended to, but that's all right. We'll get it in the end just by taking some light cuts and letting the tool do the work there. Much better, much better. And it looks beautiful. And back to sanding. Doesn't that look nice? Okay, we'll add a little finish to it. This is probably the best time to do it since it's being held in by the tenon. My next step with this top part is going to remove the tenon, so it's the only chance I really have of holding it in place while I can access the inside of the lid. And look at that, beautiful. Right, we move on to the bottom part of the bowl. I have to make the reverse of the lid where I cut into the outer edge of the bowl and fit it to the lid. So you'll see me trying a few times to see if I got the lid to fit properly or not. Cut a little bit more, try it again, and so forth. When I finally do get it together, it's on so tight I can't even knock it off with my hand. I'll have to get out the mallet and knock it off with that. Just taking little light cuts to try to get it down to the final size, and there we go. On a little too good. I'll do the final fitting in just a little bit. I want to start with cutting it out. from the inside so I get a definite idea of how thick the bowl is going to be. Do final shaping. Get rid of all the chatter. Make it look pretty. Okay, now that I've got that taken care of, time to hollow it out. My larger of the two carbide tools to be a little more aggressive because there's quite a bit of material to remove here. Speed it up a little when I can. Although it's still disbalanced because of that proportion of resin on one side and the portion of wood on the other. It keeps the weight distribution off no matter how round it is. Switch back to my smaller carbide tool to take nice light cuts and get it nice and smooth to reduce the time I spend sanding. Check the depth, move on, and so forth. And now we're sanding again, of course. I won't make you sit through all of that. Put the lid back on it and pull in the tailstock, and then we can do, as I mentioned earlier, match up the two halves, the top half and the bottom half, that little 1/16 of an inch gap, I would say, where the top was slightly larger than the bottom, so I have to very gently work my way down to where they are an even surface, like so. Now I begin to shape the top, round over the corner, make it nice and smooth, and here comes, hopefully, the surprise I've been hoping for is to, instead of creating a separate finial type of handle, I'm going to try to modify the tenon and create a handle with that. So I'm going to undercut it in a nice smooth curve and something that will hopefully fit fingers underneath it quite easily. Looks like it's coming out okay. Now that I've got the outside portion of the little handle and the top of the bowl shaped, I'm going to apply some finish. And I'll let that sit overnight for a day. Overday for a night? I don't know. I'll let that sit overnight and harden up, because the next step I need to attach the bowl lid in such a way as to be able to access the end of the center of the handle. After it hardens up, I did a little bit of fine sanding on there with the micro mesh to try to smooth everything out. There were some little bumpies as a result of putting the finish on there. I probably should have raised the grain a bit before I tried to put the finish on, but working with the micro mesh, that pulled all the, or sanded all the little bumpies out. Worked my way through the grits, polished it up nice. There we go. Looks very nice. Reapply the finish, get a smoother surface. Okay, the next day I took some blue tape and attached the lid securely, hopefully, to the bottom, and I'll pull my tailstock away and get rid of that little hole in the center of the handle. Actually, I'm just going to make an indentation, try to give it an attractive shape, and of course, back to sanding. On this one, instead of the micro mesh, I'm going to try using cutting compound. Basically a car product that you would fix up your paint with. Got into a little bit of the nooks and crannies left over, but air blew it out nicely. I can turn it around, attach it to my coal jaws, and remove the tenon on the bottom. And then we will basically be done shaping and cutting into this bowl. It'll work here with my bowl gouge, and then switch over to a spindle gouge to get the last of that tenon off. And sanding. So I buffed the entire bowl. Did not work as well as I had hoped with the finish. It would kind of gave it a mottled look in the end, and I had to kind of work really hard with the buffer to get the finish off of the resin before it would shine up well. But in the end, the extra effort I think is worth it. Came out pretty nice. And look at that beautiful bowl. Quite happy with how it turned out. I hope you like what you see. And I'll see you again next week with another video.